Hi, it's me, DaynaLN Knuckles, the People's Oracle. I am here with your reading for the new moon and solar eclipse, which is December 4th, 2021. This one is in Sidereal Scorpio, and we are continuing on with the theme that we began May and June 2020, decolonizing the survival instinct. As always, we got to start with the 2021 Sidereal Astrology Guide. We're going to flip right to the back as we always do for those fill in the blanks. And the fill in the blank for the December 4th new moon solar eclipse in Sidereal Scorpio says, litigating the laws of survival. Whew! It's the accuracy and the prescience for me. Here we are at this new moon, this solar eclipse, this new moon you can't see, it's dark. You're gonna go outside and look for the moon tonight, tomorrow, you're not gonna be able to see it because it's gonna be dark. You will not see the face of the moon illuminated. And so this is really about a moment of uncertainty, a moment of darkness, lacking clarity, insight, consciousness. So many things are taking root and so many things are being uprooted, right? This is what happens at a solar eclipse. The solar eclipse mean that the moon eclipses the face of the sun, or rather the earth's shadow is over the face of the sun. And all this really means is that something can get eclipsed out of our lives. Something can be removed. Something can be lost. Something can be severed and taken away. Litigating the laws of survival, not only here in America, but in so many other places across the globe. We are debating bodily autonomy. It is the right to feel what you feel, when you feel, what you feel, and act in accordance with those feelings. It's about the right to self-preservation. It's about the right to survival and thriving. And we're decolonizing the survival instinct because we have got to figure out why we have been colonized. We have been occupied. Our bodies have been occupied by all of these power structures and institutions, whiteness and maleness, the binary of gender, race, religion, all of these ways that we create hierarchies in society, all of these ways that division is sown amongst all of us who have a common interest in surviving on earth. Why? Right? This hot button issue of abortion, of a person with a uterus having the right to control what they do with their body and when. Litigating the laws of survival. Who has a right to survive and how? We're talking about compulsory vaccine requirements. Survival is meant to be a shared burden and not an individual obligation. And the idea that your life or death is solely in your hands is really a lie of the enemy. This idea that you on your own have the power to preserve your own life, wrong. This idea that should you die or should you experience harm, your fault, you're bad, bad for you, right? I want to take this moment to talk a little bit about the wounds, coping strategies, and gifts of Sidereal Scorpio. This is really important because I know a lot of you who are watching this video don't really understand the complexities of astrology and you're curious and maybe that's why you're watching this. Maybe you don't believe in astrology at all. I don't know. But I think it's important to talk about this because we often assume that the signs that are occupied by planets or placements in our birth chart are the only things that are relevant to us. And this is just not the case. We all have Scorpio somewhere in our birth charts. And this is seen and lived because we all deal with emotional boundaries, right? We all need them. And just because you don't have Scorpio occupied by any planets or placements does not mean this is an irrelevant topic for you, right? So I want to touch on some of this content that's actually from the Wounds and Gifts workshop that's actually up in my store right now. In the Wounds and Gifts workshop, we talk about what can your sidereal birth chart show you about the wounds, the coping strategies, and the gifts of every part of your chart. Right now, I'm going to focus on Scorpio, but if you're interested in that content, you can click the link in the description, or I'll put it up here in the corner. This is 6 hours of lectures, about 6 worksheets, and all of the slides that I presented to a small class of people between October and November of this year. So just a quick explanation here. A wound is not a judgment. It is not a statement about right or wrong. A wound is not good or bad. Inherently, a wound can be willful, it can be passive, it could be benign, and it could be malignant, right? All of these ways that we develop these important developmental aspects of ourselves. So for Scorpio, we're talking about autonomy, which is what Mars is about. Mars is the planet that's the boss of Scorpio and Aries. So both of those signs are about autonomy. And autonomy literally means self-law. I'm going to say that to you again. Autonomy literally means self-law. Auto is self. Self-law, that means self-governance. And governance not in the political sense necessarily, but really saying what drives you to act and move, right? So when we're talking about Scorpio, we're talking about the wound of alienation. We are talking about the wound of emotional abandonment. What does that mean? Alienation means to make someone an alien. And when we make someone an alien, what we're really saying is that you are too different to belong with us. We will not accept you. We will reject you. Your differences make us uncomfortable. You refuse to conform to the story that we tell about who we are and what we feel. And because you refuse to conform, we are going to withhold acceptance from you. We are going to go a step further, and we are going to project onto you everything that we think is wrong with this world and with this society. To make someone an alien is to say you don't belong here. And because you don't belong here, you don't get the rights and benefits of belonging. This can happen in your family, your community, your church. This can happen inside of relationships where your emotional reality, the physiological impulse that arises in your body as you confront someone who is overstepping your boundaries. They're saying you're not allowed to have those feelings. You're not allowed to be hurt. You're not allowed to be angry or upset. And because you are, there's something wrong with you, right? Whenever we're talking about fixed signs, Leo, Aquarius, Scorpio, Taurus, we're talking about identity. We are talking about the intersections of our assigned or claimed race, gender, class, sexual identity, or gender. And so what Scorpio is talking about when we're talking about this wound of Scorpio is that you are too different to hide, and your differences make me uncomfortable. You do not have a right to control your body. You do not have a right to feel any feelings that you feel. You feel what I tell you to feel. The coping strategy of sidereal Scorpio is isolation. So what happens when you're alienated? What happens when you're emotionally abandoned? What happens when you're left to suffer the consequences of someone else's abuse and harm on your own, and you're told it's your fault, right? Isolation. Now, this coping strategy is natural. It's good. It's good to isolate. It's good to withdraw from the harm. It's good to erect emotional boundaries that make it clear where you end and I begin. It's a good thing to be able to say those are your feelings about your life and you, and it have nothing to do with me. So you could take your feelings over there. I'm going to take mine over here. Mind yours, right? This is a good thing, but we cannot survive in isolation. Coping strategies are meant to be temporary. They are in our first aid kit. They're what we reach for when we are wounded or harmed. When Scorpio is emotionally abandoned, left to deal with the consequences of someone else's choices. Emotional abandonment really is this way that someone can be physically present with you. They can talk to you, they can feed you, they can house you, they can clothe you, they can send you text messages every day. But emotional abandonment means to withdraw connection. It is to sever. It is to reject. It is to project onto you my stuff, right? So this coping strategy of sidereal Scorpio, isolation, it means to hide. I'm reading this book, The Dead Are Arising. It's a biography on Malcolm X, complete with interviews of his family members and people who knew him personally, et cetera, and so forth. And one of the phrases that the writers keep saying that keeps catching my ear is they're talking about the ideological conflict between Marcus Garvey and W.E.B. Du Bois, right? Marcus Garvey and the NAACP and so on and so forth, the UNIA and all of these ideological differences that Black folks who were seeking liberation at the turn of the 19th to 20th century were dealing with. But one of the phrases the writer keeps using is fight or flee, right? And how this was an ideological difference between those who had been emancipated, in writing from slavery, right? This idea that we should fight for what was rightfully ours. Whereas Marcus Garvey was like, no, we should just leave and go back to Africa. Africa is for the Africans, right? And we are all Africans. We are all descendants of this same motherland, right? But that language really caught me because this is language that we use when we're talking about surviving trauma and harm. Are we going to fight our abuser? Are we going to fight our oppressor? Are we going to lay claim to what we believe is rightfully ours, even if it's only dignity and self-respect? Or are we going to flee? Are we going to isolate? Are we going to hide? Both of these are legitimate survival strategies. Sometimes isolating means to conceal the reality of who you are. But what happens when you are too different to hide? What happens when you know in your deepest truth that you are male, you are a man, but you have been given the body of a woman? How do you bridge that gap between the ways that other people see you, the gaze that you must internalize in order to survive, and the subjective reality of who you really are? Are you going to fight or are you going to flee? Are you going to do your best to conceal your differences? But again, what happens when you're too Black, too big, your accent is too thick, your eyes are too slit, right? Your breasts are too large? What happens when you are too different to hide, when you cannot conceal these differences? Then what? The gift of sidereal Scorpio is emotional boundaries. We cannot always physically leave the harm, the abuser, the oppressor. I think that Black folks in America are a great example of this. Where are we going to go? During the early 20th century, we fled the South and came to the North in hopes of outrunning Jim Crow, in hopes of outrunning the lynching rope and the Klan and sharecropping and a life of servitude where we would never be able to live and take care of ourselves and our family with the dignity that we're entitled to, right? But we come up north and Jim Crow is there too. Anti-Blackness is there too. The racism is there too, right? Where do we run to, right? And so we conceal, we isolate. We put on our best code switching accent. We dress in a way that might communicate that we're not a threat. We disarm, right? I'm in the realm of Taurus now. We talked about that at the full moon lunar eclipse in Taurus a couple weeks ago, right? But emotional boundaries is so important. And this is the gift of sidereal Scorpio, to really make a clear line of demarcation where your feelings end and mine begin. I am not going to take ownership of your hubris and arrogance that makes you think that because you are white, you are entitled to power over me, my uterus, my child, my brain, my identity. Because you have a penis, you do not have entitlement to my body. This is important that we make these lines of demarcation. So where are you in need of some serious, real emotional boundaries right now? Where are you in a place of discarding the shame for who you are and recognizing, baby, that is not yours. That's projected onto you. It's an inheritance that has been given to you, right? You know you can put it down, right? You can put down the internalized anti-Blackness. You can put down the internalized hatred of yourself as a woman. I know they told you your period was an inconvenience to the labor you needed to sell in order to survive, but that's not true, right? Decolonizing the survival instinct begins in the body. Revolution begins in the body. That's our theme for December in the 2021 Sidereal Astrology Guide, that revolution begins in the body. Revolution is not an ideological warfare. Revolution is not a political doctrine. It is staking claim and ownership over your body. This is radical because the primary tenets of whiteness and this false sense of white superiority and this false sense of male superiority, the main tenets are that your body is not your own. Your body is owned by your employer. Should you need to care for your body, you might lose your housing. You might starve. You might lose your health care. Should you need to care for the body of your own child, you might starve. You might lose your housing. Revolution begins in the body, meaning I have a right to feel how I feel, but you gotta feel. You gotta feel. And the feelings you're gonna feel, they're not gonna be good. See, what happens with the coping strategy of Scorpio is that you isolate to the point that you have severed off your emotional connections and attachments to other people. You can't survive that way, right? Then you emerge from your isolation wondering where they are. Where are the people who care for you? Where are the people who love you? Where are the people who will protect you? See, when you go into that coping strategy of isolation, you're also cutting off the people that love you, the people that care for you. And so there's this way that we have to go through this process, that we have to isolate so that we can feel our own bodies. But if you're isolating and numbing, you're defeating the purpose. If you're isolating and recognizing the real source of your suffering, if you're isolating and recognizing who your enemy really is, that's a different story. You can emerge with firm emotional boundaries and learn to have a tolerance for difference. Have a tolerance for difference so that we can come together and really connect on the big points that are most important to us, which I think is decolonizing the survival instinct. I hope this has made sense for you. I am ready to pull some cards, but if you're interested in learning more about the wounds, coping strategies, and gifts of your sidereal birth chart, I very strongly recommend that you take a visit to shop.thepeoplesoracle.com and you purchase the Wounds and Gifts workshop. Remember, this is 6 hours of lecture content in 4 sessions, 6 worksheets. I walk you through understanding what a wound coping strategy and gift is and how to identify all of these patterns in your chart and what they mean. We got into talking about what the wounds, coping strategies, and gifts means in terms of vocation, parenting, relationships, generational inheritances. I mean, we went so deep. If you've already downloaded the Wounds and Gifts workshop, stick a comment below. And I really want to know what's been the most mind-blowing part for you. I know when I was going back and editing it, just the first 20 minutes of the first lecture, I was like, whoa, I was dropping a knowledge. Okay. All right. Let's pull some tarot cards. Here we are at the new moon solar eclipse in sidereal Scorpio. We are talking about alienation. We are talking about isolation. We are talking about emotional boundaries. We are talking about revolution begins in the body. You got to feel to get free. All of this new age nonsense telling you that you're focusing too much on the negative. No, you're not focusing too much on the negative. You're not focusing enough on the true source of your suffering. You think it's all your fault. You think it's your thoughts. You think it's your beliefs. You think it's because you didn't have a vision board that had the right images. You didn't meditate enough. You didn't self-care enough. And what I have to say to that is that. Okay? Let's talk about the real source of our suffering and how if we're really going to get free, we got to be able to feel some discomfort, and we have to be able to hold space for each other to have divergent emotional realities. We can't expect everybody to conform to us because not everybody has our experiences. You feel what I'm saying? Revolution begins in the body, man. That's probably the most radical thing that I've ever said, because everybody wants to pick up arms and protest, and that's cool, but you have got to be willing to feel your discomfort. I'm not talking about other people making you uncomfortable. I'm talking about the discomfort with your own contradictions. You feel what I'm saying? Your own internalized anti-blackness and hatred of yourself. Your own internalized hatred of your insert ethnicity or race. The way that you've made yourself subservient in patriarchy. Yes, there are real oppressors. Yes, there's violence and harm that we must escape. Yes, all of those things. And also, you too police other women in order for you to get some power in patriarchy to gain the favor of men. You too police other Black people so that you can get some power in this white superstructure we live in. You too police other people's gender and sexuality. You feel what I'm saying? You feel what I'm saying? Let's see what these cards say. Wheel of Fortune. We've got the wheel. This is cyclical changes. And so, I just bring that up in terms of how we're dealing with these cycles and how there's always something unresolved. And the next time we come around this part of the zodiac or this particular astrological configuration, as it were, right, that these things aren't new. When we see the Wheel of Fortune, we're talking about cyclical shifts. We're talking about a change in season. And I think that this is important for a variety of reasons. We're coming upon the solstice, where we have the least amount of sunlight here in the Northern Hemisphere. We are coming towards the end of 2021. We are coming towards the end of this series of eclipses in Sidereal, Taurus, and Scorpio. This is a shift. This is a change. So I really want you to think back to 2019 when Jupiter was in Scorpio. I want you to think back to May and June of 2020, the first eclipse in this series. How were you radicalized? What rage was awakened in your belly that has been quenched by neglect? What fire, what righteous anger, what pain, what grief have you suppressed that's surfacing now? What are you going to do with that? What are you going to do with those feelings? In the 2021 Sidereal Astrology Guide, one of the questions I asked for December was talking about what's your relationship with uncomfortable feelings? And the feeling I'm most interested in is rage and anger. I know that here in America, we have been neutered of our anger. We cannot access the truth of our rage, which is a righteous reaction to the injustice and oppression that we experience minute by minute each day. But most of us are so uncomfortable with our rage and anger that we allow ourselves to be walked over. We feel like we can't control it. But rage and anger becomes uncontrollable when you're constantly repressing it. And so in what small ways do you need to acknowledge that your boundaries have been offended? What safe spaces can you practice accessing and expressing your anger? I know for many of us, being angry has meant we would be abandoned. Emotionally abandoned, left alone. That's scary. We were told that our pain was our fault. The abuse and trauma that we have been on the receiving end was because we are too this, not enough that. And there's so much internalized shame and self-abandonment that comes from that. But there's got to be one safe space where you can access that anger. And that's going to open you up to some things. It's going to open you up to the righteous rage that really needs to be directed at dismantling this nonsense that we're in. You feel me? Let's see what the rest of these cards say, because I'm about to start preaching. I ain't ready yet. So give me a second. Let me pull one more card. What? Not again. Oh man, that's the Emperor. We just had the Emperor. Man, let me tell you something. God, Spirit, the Holy Spirit, whoever be speaking through me is very, 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 very clear. Get up off your knees. That was the message from the full moon lunar eclipse in Sidereal Taurus a couple weeks ago. Get up off your knees. You want to be approved of. You want to be liked. But on the other side of this, in the Sidereal Scorpio, this is about stand firm in your difference, right? Stand firm. Get up off your knees, right? Now, I recognize that for so many of us, it is not safe to be seen. It is not safe to be our full selves publicly, because if we do, we will be subject to violence that can lead, and often does lead, to death. This is reality. And so if you are in one of those situations and you are in those circumstances, this message probably isn't for you. This message probably isn't for you, and that's okay. But there are still ways inside your safe relationships that you can learn to grow a tolerance for emotional differences. Maybe this message is for you, right? Those of us who have been abandoned, those of us who have been subject to alienation, are the ones that often become people pleasers. We carry a lot of shame and we don't want to upset people because the consequences hurt, right? But inside your safe relationships, do you have a tolerance for difference? Can you maintain connection inside a relationship without abandoning who you are and your feelings? I know I'm asking some really hard questions, and I know that there are no easy answers to this, but Scorpio ain't no punk. I know over in Tropical, they told you that Scorpio was all about sex, and don't look a Scorpio in the eye because they gonna brainwash you and eat your soul and sell it to your children or something like that. I don't know. But that's not really what we're dealing with here in Divination for Liberation, right? Here, we are talking about the reality that many of us can perform in a way that conceals our differences. But there's a lot of us who cannot do anything. Your skin is dark chocolate and you're 6'5", and there is nothing you can do about that, right? You are a first generation immigrant, and that accent be coming through and you can't hide it, right? And you're judged. There are real survival consequences for those things. But revolution begins in the body. And it's so important that we begin the work of decolonizing the survival instinct inside our most intimate relationships, inside our most chosen relationships, not the ones of convenience and not the ones that we were born into, because those stakes can be too high sometimes. Inside our chosen relationships, can we have a healthy tolerance for difference? Can we draw firm emotional boundaries to say, hey, I hear you, I feel you, but that's yours, right? Can we acknowledge the labor of emotional intimacy and how it's terrifying to be seen when you've had to hide your entire life? It is an unfamiliar posture for many of us to be our full selves and not be rejected, not be alienated or physically harmed, right? The Emperor is always on that boss, right? It's about recognizing your power, not that you are in control of it, of everything, but coming into right relationship with your power in a way that says, I know what's mine and I know what's not mine. I know what I'm capable of and I know what I'm not capable of. I know what I have the power to influence and change, and I know what I don't have the power to influence and change. And this is really important because in the cult of individualism here where we live in America and anywhere else that this cult and indoctrination has infected the world, we are taught that everything is within our powers. It's in our bootstraps. It's in our vision board. If we can change our thoughts, we can change our life. I'm sorry. My thoughts by myself are not going to change the fact that this world hates Black women. Now, if we're all imagining together, that's what I call liberation. That's something different. But my own, right? My suffering is a shared suffering, and that's injustice, right? The very function of oppression in this society is to make you think that it is your fault. And if you change enough, then you would not be subject to the harm and oppression you're subject to, right? But the emperor is admonishing us to come into right relationship with our power. And often coming into right relationship with our power is recognizing what we actually don't have the individual power to change. And I know that's scary, bad news for some of you all. And the worst thing for many of us to do is acknowledge our impotence, to acknowledge that we have no influence or power to change this situation. But I promise you, revolution begins in the body, and all the arrogance and hubris that we carry around with us to tell us the story of if I just, and I got this and I'm on top of it and right? Bull. We see through you. You see through you, you know. That's not how you really feel. How you really feel is, why won't someone validate you and accept you exactly how you are? What you really feel is, why do I have to keep hiding? What you really feel is, why can't anybody see me? Why do I feel invisible? Why am I invisible? What you really feel is shame. What you really feel is the consequences of a lifelong need to abandon your emotional truth, to abandon the truth of who you are, to survive. That's why we got to decolonize the survival instinct, because you're not alone. This is a feature, an intentional feature of this society and this world we live in. I mean, I don't know if you watched the Supreme Court hearing the other day and the way how glibly these men spoke about fetuses and uteruses without ever talking about the women or the people who actually have the uterus or nourish the fetus. I think that that's a great place to end. This has been your new moon solar eclipse reading for Sidereal Scorpio, and I want you to talk to me in the comments. I want you to talk to me about emotional boundaries, and I want you to talk to me about the ways that these past couple of weeks have been tough for you. I know it's been tough for a lot of us, but it's important that we talk about it together so that we can constantly push back against this idea that our suffering is a personal problem. There will never be a revolution as long as you think your suffering is a personal problem. Once you realize that your suffering is a shared experience of injustice, you can start to access your anger, right? Your righteous rage that's necessary to overthrow this whole thing. I know you're ready. 2022 is calling us. You've just got your divination for liberation. Thank you all for tuning in, and I will see you all soon.